Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Jennifer Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers and adjunct professor at University of Pennsylvania Law School, whose talent for translating AI into practice has helped reshape how firms approach innovation.
Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm thrilled today to have Jennifer Leonard on. She is the founder of Creative Lawyers, and she's also a podcast host at PLI, as well as an adjunct professor at University of Pennsylvania. And Jennifer, if you could tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Yeah. Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to see you. I've followed your newsletters for a very long time. Thank you for keeping me up to speed on all the things AI. I really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. And likewise, I had the pleasure of seeing Jennifer present in DC, and she was giving the overview about everything AI going on. And there's so much that, we all need to keep up with. So it's much appreciated.
Absolutely. And with respect to what I'm doing these days, it's a lot of AI work, really a lot of what you saw in DC, which is trying to connect the dots for non-technologists around what is happening right now in the technology space. I am not a technologist by training. I'm a lawyer by training. So I come to it naturally, I think, in the same way. But I have the luxury of having a little bit more time, I think, than somebody practicing law every day to dig in, learn as much as I can about AI, and then use some of the tools I've developed as a professor to try to translate what all of this means in a language that is digestible for lawyers, and then help them think through all of the amazing opportunities AI creates to practice law in ways that are more client-centric, that hopefully elevate attorney well-being, that maybe move us away from a world where we're so closely aligned with the amount of time we spend on a task to our value, to whatever we're doing, to a world where we can really leverage technology in more and more powerful ways, and apply our strategic minds to solving problems for our clients. So right now, that's a lot of what we do, a lot of law firm retreats. And we saw one another at the Pro Bono Institute conference, doing a fair amount of work with courts and public interest advocates to think through all of the opportunities that AI creates for actually responding to the access to justice crisis in new ways. And we could talk more about my journey, but that is not actually what I intended to do when I started my company. I really was focused on innovation more broadly and design thinking for lawyers, but happened to jump right at the moment when ChatGPT was released. So that is where I've been spending a lot of my time.
Yeah, I noticed that. You founded Creative Lawyers in 2022, right?
Yes.
Was it like towards the latter half of 2022?
I think it was, I had started it while I was still full-time at Penn. So I was at Penn Law for 10 years in various roles. My final role there when I was full-time was leading their Future of the Profession initiative and serving as their first chief innovation officer to think about a changing profession and preparing our students for a world that is probably different than the world that many of their supervisors would be accustomed to guiding them through. And then as I was doing that work, I was also doing a fair amount of consulting work on the side, working with firms who were interested in figuring out what innovation might mean. A lot of that work came out of the pandemic when we were sort of forced all of a sudden to think about new ways of working. And I really, really loved building a client base, serving firms and corporate legal departments and lots of different stakeholders across the profession. So I made the decision, I think, what year is it? It's 2025. Yeah. I think I made the decision about the end of 2022 to take a leap and do that work full time. So I've been full time for about 2 years now.
Wow. And just by the way, I thoroughly respect, working as a professor at law school, because now this was my first semester doing that. And, like the amount of prep work and writing and it's just crazy, like how much But you learn a lot from the students too, right?
Oh, you learn so much from the students. And my dad was a teacher, a public school teacher, a fifth grade teacher, and he always hated when people would say, I learn more from my students than they do from me. It's like they should be learning more from me than I learn from them. But I feel like having to teach other people, or at least the way I teach, I really like to do project-based learning and experiential learning. So we're learning together in some type of real world conditions. But I feel like for a course like generative AI and law practice, which I got the chance to co-teach with Bridget McCormick from the American Arbitration Association during my last semester there full time. With a topic like that, it just gives me such an opportunity to learn myself, because you really have to be, ahead of where your students are and understanding and shaping a curriculum and selecting resources. So I definitely learned a ton from teaching. And it helps me now in my work, because I think about a learner-centric mindset when I create activities and presentations. So yes, being an educator, I think, is just an incredibly challenging experience that I think everybody thinks they can do really well, until they step into those shoes and realize how challenging it can be. And law students, I think, are one of the toughest audiences out there. So I think if you can deliver top-notch quality material for law students, you're really set up for success.
I really love your point about the mindset, because I think that plays such a critical role that people kind of discount. They assume the mindset because they haven't really thought about consciously choosing the mindset. So I think that's a really great point.
I think mindset is like 90% of everything that we do. I'm talking with a colleague later today about some projects in the higher ed space generally. And a lot of what we think about, has less to do with being an expert in any given area and more to do with shifting the mindset around what learning actually is. Less of sage on the stage, content delivery, memorization, and more thinking about how our brains actually work and the skills that we need to develop to be effective across domains, and how we design experiences in the classroom that help students actually develop judgment and problem solving and negotiation skills. So all of that is just, starts with shifting your mindset around what teaching should be.
All right. Well, with those teasers planted, let's go back to the beginning, because I do want to get back into more of the weeds of the innovation mindset in AI later, but I do want to explore how you got started. And you're in Pennsylvania now, but did you grow up in Pennsylvania?
I did. I'm a Philly girl through and through. I've been here my whole life. They can't get rid of me. And I'm married to a Philly boy, so we're definitely not going anywhere.
All right. So you grew up in the city. And what kind of work did your parents do?
I should say I grew up right outside the city in an area called Delaware County, which is called Delco for short. It's a whole culture in and of itself, but it's about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia. My dad was a Philadelphia public school teacher for 40 years. Before that, he was a professional athlete. He was a AAA baseball player. And in those days, in the 60s, when you weren't playing, you came home and you got a winter job. And the job that he got was as a substitute teacher in Philadelphia public schools. And he just fell in love with teaching. So he decided to leave baseball, and he had a very, very successful and happy career as a teacher. My mom was an executive assistant primarily at Bryn Mawr College for the last 25 years of her career. And she also worked at the Franklin Mint back in the day in the 1970s. She tells me stories that sounds like a Mad Men-esque era
Oh, no.
of corporate work. But she loved all of it, and they are fantastic parents. They still live in Delco, so they're about 25 minutes away from me now.
Wow. So education and also with your mom, like maybe a little bit of an entrepreneurial kind of influence there.
Definitely. And from both of them, really. My dad, teaching is not the world's most lucrative career, especially when you're raising a family. So my dad always had side hustles. They weren't called side hustles then, but he sold life insurance after hours and did various things. My brother and I were always in the summer, like taking leaflets and passing them out around the neighborhood for insurance and all other sorts of supports that he provided to people. So I think I got the entrepreneurial bug from him as well. Just always loved working, really. Just like hate to be idle. It's not good for my mind. I also inherited all my dad's anxiety. So I have to constantly be busy. I'm like a border collie. And if I'm not, I spend too much time up here, which is not good.
I can appreciate that. Um, so describe the neighborhood a little bit to me, like Delco. What was that like?
Oh my gosh. Delco is a whole a whole world unto itself. I mean, Delco is legitimately like a thing now in pop culture. There are movies about it. Like Tina Fey is from Delco. A lot of SNL cast members, strangely, are from that area. So I would say it is it was always like a middle class working suburb of Philadelphia, but with a strong sense of humor, apparently. I think before the internet arose, we didn't know that there was anything special about us at all. It was just like we were just Delconians, you know. And then we got out into the broader world and apparently made people laugh. And I don't know, it was just a tight knit community, friends, you know, on the block. It wasn't a worldly upbringing by any stretch of the imagination. We would play with the kids in our neighborhood, sort of typical suburban stuff, but we were very close to Philly. So, you know, big Philly sports neighborhood, cheered for the Eagles, go Birds, Super Bowl champs this year. And everybody followed the Phillies. So if you walk down the street at dinner time, you would hear Richie Ashburn and Harry Callis on the radio walking home. So a lot of sports, a lot of friendships, a lot of hard work, and a really strong communal sense of humor.
I'm curious, besides your parents, were there any other like early influences of people that, you know, had kind of like a mentorship type of role, or like whose advice that, you know, made sense and that you listened to? Was there anything like that?
That's a really good question. That early on in my life, I mean, I think like a lot of people, or maybe not, maybe I'm lucky. I had really great teachers growing up, like actual teachers, and they were probably the most formative influences. I went to a parochial Catholic school for the first until sixth grade, and had some pretty stern nuns as teachers. So they taught me to sort of stay in line and follow directions, which I think, you know, probably laid a good foundation for becoming a lawyer. And then I went to school from 6th to 12th grade that was in Villanova, Pennsylvania, if you're familiar with the area. And I had great teachers. I had a fantastic literature teacher, Mr. Small, and some other great nuns also at that school, which was also a Catholic school.
You know, Catholic schoolboy here myself, so I know the drill.
You have to confess. You have to confess because it's in the upbringing.
Yeah, the drill and the rulers on occasion.
The rulers on occasion. My dad tells a story about being hit by a ruler because he was left-handed in the 50s.
Was that the reason why? Because he was left-handed?
Yeah, it was a whole thing back then that it was like, you know, not the way you were supposed to be writing from a religious standpoint, I guess. So yeah. The nuns would like smack you until you wrote with your right hand. Fortunately, we've made some progress since then.
Yeah, a little bit. So the next step naturally is going to Penn State. And I mean, that seems like a natural transition because you're in Pennsylvania and Penn State. Is there, I didn't see though from the research what you majored in.
Oh yeah, actually it was not at all a natural transition. I was not looking at Penn State at all. We actually went up to look for my brother. I had applied to and been accepted to a lot of small liberal arts schools. And I got out of the car when we got to Penn State's campus and just completely fell in love with it. And it was the complete opposite of everything I'd experienced to date. You know, I went to an all-girls school, and there were 80 girls in my graduating class, all from the same area of the world. And there I was stepping foot onto a campus with 45,000 other kids from all around, mostly from around the state, but from, you know, a much broader swath than I was used to. And I just felt like I could do anything I wanted there. I actually started as an animal bioscience major. I wanted to become a veterinarian. I wanted to go to Penn Vet when I was done at Penn State. And when I went to orientation They took us out to this farmhouse. They have like beautiful farming equipment and infrastructure there. And I met these kids who grew up on farms all across Pennsylvania. And I got so intimidated, Tom, because they were like 4-H award winners and they had been raised on farms. And I was like a suburban kid with a dog. And so I switched majors like the first week I was there, which I look back and I'm really disappointed that I did that. I was admitted to the program ostensibly because I could do it, but I got very, very overwhelmed. So I switched and I think then I was a communications major for a minute, and then I landed on political science and Spanish. So I graduated with degrees in both, and really have always loved political science anyway. But that was a much more natural fit, I think, than animal bioscience. So who knows what my career could have been like? I could be on a veterinarian's podcast now.
Yeah, but I think all of us, we find our way in, like you can never really map things out. As you know, with the map of success, it's like not a straight line. Yeah.
No, I used to tell my students at the law school that I don't know if you're familiar with this game, but on The Price is Right, they used to have this game called Plinko. Do you know Plinko?
Yes.
And they would come in, and just like I would, and they'd want to go to X law firm and they're going to be a partner there and that's going to be their career. And I said, it's much more like a Plinko chip. You're going to drop it in here and this will be your first job. And you're going to hit a million pins on the way down. You'll end up somewhere you never could have imagined ending up. So definitely agree.
I love that, Plinko. Mm-hmm. The Plinko path to success.
They never had any idea what I was referring to. That's when you feel old.
Well, okay, so you get degrees in poli-sci and Spanish. So was the leap to go to law school after that because that's a way to have a living going forward, or was there another motivation?
No, I mean, I think I was so young when I applied to law school. I think when I matriculated to law school, I was still 21. So I was really a baby, and I didn't have any lawyers in my family, but law just felt like this really impressive endeavor. A liberal arts background felt well suited for law. I had a great professor at Penn State for whom I was a TA, and he was, gave me the same line a lot of kids here, which is like, you could do anything with a law degree. And I think I just had no idea what I actually would enjoy. But I knew that I was really good at school, and I, was a big fan of To Kill a Mockingbird and Law and Order. And I saw a lot of great lawyers in the public eye in pop culture. So I just got really involved in the pre-law society there, met a lot of other kids who also wanted to go to law school and was influenced by them. I had a chance to go on a legal externship to Dublin, Ireland when I was there to study the Irish legal system. And we went to like the Supreme Court there and the Garda and Trinity Law School. And I was really all about it at that point in my life. So it became sort of like a singular focus for me to get into law school.
Wow, that's really awesome. That Dublin experience must have been really cool.
Oh, that was so fun. It was great.
So while you were in law school, with that experience, like, was there a particular, practice area or type of law that attracted you, or was it just more, I'm going to go from here to working in a law firm? Like,
oh my gosh, I had no idea what I was doing. I graduated college in December and started law school in August. And in between, I worked in the Delaware County District Attorney's Office. So I thought for a while that I wanted to be an ADA when I got out. And then I went to Penn for law school, and it was a much different environment. I didn't really even understand that a lot of students there went to big law firms, based in New York, and global firms. So then I was very heavily influenced by my classmates who were all going to big firms. I knew I wanted to stay in Philly, though. I never had any interest in going to New York. But I ended up doing on-campus interviewing and found a firm in Philly. But if you looked at my transcript from law school, the classes I picked, like, I was all over the map. I took divorce law and sports law and tobacco law and antitrust, and like, they were all super interesting classes, but there was clearly no roadmap for what I was planning to do.
But you know what? I think there's a thread to pull there in terms of like having a curiosity and generalist mindset, because I think having ease with that, like the confidence to be able to move through those different subjects, is really useful now.
I totally agree. I definitely was not confident. I wish you'd been around back then to tell me that's what it was. I was just more clueless than confident, but I agree with, it's funny that you say that. I was just emailing this morning with Bridget McCormick, who is the co-host of my podcast with me. And we were exchanging notes about a blog post about how the future belongs to generalists and how much we love being generalists. And it lets you really, span all of your experiences and draw pieces of it. And also, I think, recognize the value that other people's expertise brings to solving really big, wicked problems. So now I would totally agree with you, but I think maybe we're being overly generous to my 22-year-old self, who was just like, tobacco law sounds like a fun thing to study.
Well, I also want to say I'm a big fan of Bridget. I think what she's doing is amazing over at American Arbitration Association, really taking it into the future.
Oh, she is the best, one of the best people I've ever had the good fortune to cross paths with. And I'm just so grateful anytime she lets me collaborate with her around anything.
With law school under your belt, I know that like one of your first things was working as a law clerk, right? And then you worked firms after that. I guess from that experience, without diving into each one individually, like what were some lessons learned from that experience that you carry forward today?
One, that I was not born to be a law firm lawyer. Like that was like basically clear to me by lunch the first day. It was not the right fit for me. Again, like you look back and you sort of realize how much of your life is, you think it's like so much under your control, but a lot of it is just, luck and circumstance. And I happened to be coming out of law school at a time when litigation was really hot. And so I became a litigator. I hate conflict. So being focused on disputes all day, every day was really not a good alignment with my personality. But I learned a lot about precision-oriented work, the rigor and the discipline that you need to be a really strong legal writer and researcher. And I learned that in both the clerkship and working for the firm, but the clerkship in particular, just my writing skills were horrendous when I got there. And I thought I was a good writer. And I learned very quickly that I was a terrible writer. And I remember the first time I turned in Pennsylvania, we call them aliquotter reports. It's like the equivalent of certiorari at the federal level. And the clerks would write aliquotter reports recommending that we grant aliquotter or deny aliquotter to hear an appeal. And I remember getting the first aliquotter report that I wrote back, and it was just like covered in red ink from front to back. And I immediately had to walk out of the chambers and go for a walk with my co-clerk because I just felt so badly. Like, they are paying me to do this job and I'm terrible at it. And then the clerk, who's a good friend of mine to this day and an incredible mentor and kind person, she was like, this is what everybody's writing looks like in August at the beginning of their clerkship. And then over the course of that clerkship, my goal was just to get less and less red on every page. And I accomplished that, I'm happy to say, by the end. And now I feel like that experience to me really made me a much, much stronger writer and critic, really, of other writing, not in a negative way, but in a way where you see the strength of communication. So those were probably my biggest takeaways. I think from working in a firm, and we'll talk about working for the city by comparison, looking back, I see a lot of the challenges to the business model that ultimately sort of inspired a lot of the work that I did in innovation. Like, I just see ways that the work could be better for the lawyers and for the clients. And this sort of relentless focus on billing more hours and the pressure that it puts on people. I would love to see a world where that is not how we price legal work. So those were some of my takeaways, and made great friends, by the way, at the law firm. It's not a dig on my firm at all. It's a dig on my thought that I was the right fit for an environment like that.
Well, one takeaway that is really sticking with me right now is you mentioned like the working through the redlining, like one step at a time, and it like reflects the mindset of, okay, it's not going to be perfect to start with, and it's not going to be all perfect right now. But if I work through, the red, like the marks, the improvements that I can make on a daily basis, one step at a time, that I will get there, and having that faith that you're going to get there.
Again, I did not think this at the time, but I totally agree with you now. And if you're in innovation, that has to be the mindset, right? The bias to action idea of let's start with something. And the funny thing is now that's what lights me up, is starting with something rough and like working with creative partners to make it stronger and stronger. And I think to your earlier comment, like I think that comes with having more confidence of, all right, let's get something out there, even if it's flawed. It doesn't mean I'm deeply flawed. It means like now we have something to work with and we can make it better. At the time, I was so not confident that all the red marks to me were like, you're terrible. You shouldn't be part of this profession. Like, why did we give you a job? But I think like the number one piece of feedback I would get on my legal writing at the beginning was that I was too conclusory in the conclusions that I was drawing without detailing the reasoning that I used to get there. And it's funny, like, I don't know if you have kids, but you could see it in your kids too. Like, I can see them doing it now too. And it doesn't mean that they're like not intelligent or can't get up to speed, but I see the same sort of like shortcuts to coming to your conclusion. And of course, if you're a lawyer or a judge, you need to spell out how you're reaching your conclusion. So I'm grateful for all of that editing because it really made me think more about how I reason through problems.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like the ability to intuit what the answer is, or what, to use inductive reasoning to kind of like jump to where you want to go that's a talent to have. But at the same time, to communicate to other people like how you got there or why they should get there. For me too. Like it took time to figure out how to break it down and like put it into a way that was easy for other people to make sense of.
And that's the discipline piece, right? It's like,
yeah.
I get where I want to go, so I'm just going to tell you where I want this to be. Like, no, slow down. You have about 6 different steps between the problem statement that you've identified and where you're leaping to in your conclusion. So walk me through what those 6 steps are. And the sort of neurological strengthening that goes on as a result of that process is really incredible, but it can be frustrating at the time, when you're young and you're urgent and you just want to get something done. So I'm super grateful to have had that experience, and hopefully it has made me a stronger writer in the end.
I know it has from what I've read. And I have a similar experience with my girls are 17 and 22. And I remember back when I was their age that you kind of see things like from a straightforward standpoint, but don't realize that actually like it's an old saw, but like the journey itself is enriching. And it really is, because that informs, what choices you make. And also like you learn a lot, as you're saying right now, from that experience. And it's not something to be discounted. I think sometimes we discount it. We just look at the end goal,
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I know you're in AI world, so you follow Ethan Mollick, I'm sure. And we've gotten this far into a podcast before I cited Ethan Mollick, but he talks about times when you shouldn't use AI. And one of the times he talks about it is learning in situations where the effort is the point of the activity. And I think that's what I didn't understand when I was starting clerking, that like the effort that you put into writing during a clerkship is the point of having a clerkship. It is very much a public service, I think, that judges provide to new law graduates. They're not looking for, or they're not expecting, I guess, polished opinions that they could just put a signature on. It's probably not that helpful for them earlier on in the clerkship, because the effort really is the point, and the failure and the resilience and the growth that happens during that year is the point of the clerkship.
I love
But I
that.
didn't get any of that then.
um, well, okay, so just kind of generally from your experience in your roles as a lawyer, um, what were some insights that you got about, you know, how you could use AI and automation that would make sense, like in a practical way? Were there some things that stood out to you as, we've done it this way, but we don't have to always do it this way?
Well, I have to tell you, unlike you, Tom, and many other trailblazers, I am not somebody who spent my entire legal career thinking about how tech could improve things. I dabbled in tech in terms of programming that I built for students when I was later at Penn. Um, Casey Flaherty, whom you might know, made a lot of headlines when he was in the corporate counsel's office at Kia Motors, and he gave the legal tech audit to all of their outside counsel. And what he found was that most lawyers, including like allegedly tech savvy associates, could not use basic Microsoft technology to its utmost. And so there was a lot of pressure on entering lawyers to demonstrate to their firms that they were actually tech savvy. So we built a program when I was at Penn around technology competency. But outside of that, I would not say I was, a tech evangelist or an automator or anything like that until ChatGPT came on the scene. So in a lot of ways, I'm much like everybody else, like sort of stunned by this technology and really thinking through all the different implications, applications, pros, cons, like risks, opportunities as everybody else. It's just, and maybe that's a testament to the technology and why I believe so firmly that it will reshape legal practice, because I think it has caused a lot of people that weren't paying as much attention as you were and others were to the real capacity of tech to transform the world and legal practice in particular. But I think over the years, as I've become more mature and have a chance to sort of reflect on legal education, law practice, the civil justice crisis, even corporate counsel's frustration sometimes with law firms, it's been evident to me for quite some time that there are many, many ways in which we have poorly designed the way that we deliver services. And there are many opportunities to reimagine that. And I think AI is really, the flame to the gasoline of like opportunities to really do things in bigger ways.
I'm curious, do you remember your first experience with ChatGPT, like back in November 2022, or whenever you first, what was that experience like for you?
I don't remember the exact first prompt that I put into ChatGPT. I just remember being like stunned, like everybody else was, that I could log on as somebody not particularly tech fluent and ask it to like create a recipe for beef stroganoff in the voice of Shakespeare or something, like all the silly things that we did at the very beginning. Or like my mom and I went to Arizona that fall with my kids, and I remember asking it to create an itinerary for a 70-year-old woman, a 45-year-old woman, and an 8-year-old girl that they would enjoy in Scottsdale. And it was like amazing to me how quickly, and it was flawed, like there were things I had to fix, but just to have an itinerary spit out at you like that. And I copied and pasted it and sent it to my mom, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, it's so thoughtful that you put all this time into thinking through our trip." Like it took 10 seconds. And I do remember because it recommended that we go on a hot air balloon ride, and my mom's terrified of heights, so I had to write back and say, "Please remove the hot air balloon to keep us on the ground." But I do remember just this feeling of like, this feels very different to me. And I was around a lot of critical thinkers because I'm in the legal profession who were very, very skeptical that there was anything to see here. And I remember talking to people who would say, like, this is going to maybe have some impact around the margins, some basic paperwork, administrative type things, but this is never going to impact the work that lawyers do. And I don't know what it was about it, Tom. I just felt like very early on that it was going to change things. And it was only going to get better from there. And every time it gets better, it's only going to get better from there. And that's what we've seen over the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy, like the pace of change and what it could do now versus then. But I do remember back then myself that it was just, I mean, it was the first time I ever had like a fluent conversation with a machine. That's for sure.
Mhm.
Even
Yeah.
though it was imperfect, it was just kind of mind blowing that that was possible.
Well, and you are much more steeped in technology than I am, and you remember all the years when we would struggle with natural language processing and trying to create chatbots for the public to use to have, some access to the information that they needed, and what a slog that was. I know about it because I would have guests to my classes to talk about the work that they were doing, like Jonathan Pyle here in Philadelphia
Yeah.
have been doing so much. He had the office next to me at my law firm for like a minute, and he would come in and he would share these amazing experiments he was running and all this stuff that he was programming, and I couldn't replicate it, but I could see how challenging it was and how much work went into it. And then all of a sudden it felt like one day this thing appeared that you could just talk to, like you said, naturally and fluently, and it felt like you accelerated by decades the things that people had been working on to that point.
The context of that is you founded Creative Lawyers. And as you mentioned, the focus on it initially was kind of from like a legal design standpoint to communicate that and educate lawyers about how to think, I would imagine, more thoughtfully about what they're doing. And and then, ChatGPT comes along. How did that change the focus? What were some of the questions that you were being asked? Like, how did things develop from there?
Yeah, so you're totally right. Before that, my focus, both in creative lawyers and in the teaching and the work that I was doing at Penn, was on legal design. And when I stepped into an innovation role at the law school, I got the chance to meet all of these amazing innovators across Penn's campus, including at Wharton Engineering and Penn Nursing, all of whom were teaching and using design thinking and human centered design to reimagine the way that they delivered whatever services they were delivering, whether it was healthcare or engineering type buildings. And I didn't see a lot of that happening in legal. Now, I know that there are great people, Margaret Hagan and others, who have been focused on legal design for much longer than I have, Kat Moon. But writ large, when you go to law school, you learn how to think like a lawyer and you think like a judge. But it's very seldom, like to the earlier point of mindset, that we flip that and think like a member of the public who needs legal support, or think like a corporate client, or think like any of the people that we're serving. You get some of that in clinics, you get a little bit in legal writing, but it's not the foundational perspective that we anchor to when we create systems. So that was what I was excited about and focused on. And then the question that AI sort of surfaced, well, there were a million questions that surfaced, but a few were, what are the ways we can turbocharge design thinking by using AI to integrate into a system that was not well designed to deliver services and deliver them better? On the firm side, I mean, it's an existential question as to, if you have technology that can do some of the work that we've been doing in seconds that we were billing by the hour for, and it took days, what does that mean for our business model? And on the corporate client side, I had a lot of incoming inquiries, like on the other side of the transaction, like how do we leverage this to reshape our outside counsel spend so that it's going for the most sophisticated work that we want to procure and help us solve our business problems? And how do we minimize the more routine, low value add work that we're charging enormous, or we're being charged enormous hourly rates for? And then in the court system, judges and court administrators who've been tackling the civil justice crisis forever want to know, how can we use this safely and ethically to deliver justice more efficiently in the form of like resolving disputes, and also helping people access legal information in different languages at different reading levels, in ways that don't require people necessarily to come to the courthouse and leave their busy lives. So I don't know, the questions were just everywhere. It almost felt like, we're trying to catch up to the technology now and figure out what it can help us do.
Well, it sounds like you were especially well positioned, having, you know, being a professor at Penn, and also, the experience of being a practitioner yourself and thinking through these different questions through that lens. I mean, people right now, they really need guides. They need, mediums that are in the thick of this, that are, like you and me, grappling with how, what are the implications of all this, these new things that come out, how's that going to change things? And, for practicing lawyers, it's difficult enough for them to keep up with their work, let alone all these various developments. So what would you say some of the answers were that you came up with, like some of the directions and guidance that you were giving or give now?
Yeah, I mean, one are presentations, right? Like there is a little bit of content delivery to get everybody up to speed and level set. And I think we're moving out of that phase a little bit, or at least the level setting is a little bit more sophisticated than it was 6 months ago, even. But we still need to make sure everybody is at the same point of understanding the tech and where it is and what the implications are. But beyond that, it's a general purpose technology. There's no specific way to use it. And I view like you said, the role of a guide to be creating general purpose activities where teams and firms and courts and schools can come together in carved out space. And I help them by creating some structure to follow. But within that structure, they're exploring the outputs of a frontier grade model in a safe environment and thinking of it more broadly than just a point solution, and using it really like as a co-intelligence, a co-pilot, a thought partner, and just giving them time to share with one another. Like, oh, I'll give you an example. I do a few different activities with firms around responding to RFPs from corporate clients. So we'll create a hypothetical RFP. We've done them with higher ed organizations and major cities and corporate clients. And we create like a really complex fact pattern of what the client is looking for. And then we design activities where partners will sit around a table at a retreat, and they all have a laptop open. They have access to either ChatGPT 4.5 or Claude 3.7 Sonnet, whatever the most cutting edge. By the time this podcast is out, they'll be like obsolete. But whatever the most cutting edge thing is, that most of them have not played around with yet because it's not on-prem, it's not sanctioned by the firm, and you can't put client information into. And walk them through, like, what are the things in this RFP that are explicit and what are the things that are implicit? Like, put yourself in the perspective of a corporate counsel in a higher ed organization. What are they not communicating to you in this hypothetical that maybe is very, very important to them that they can't put in writing? And they come back with like some interesting takeaways of things that might be crisis communication oriented that they're not going to actually explicitly name in an RFP, but might come up in the course of the representation. And then it's sort of like, oh, we were only thinking of this as a real estate transaction or a tax transaction. But we now realize that if you dig in, the GC might be worried about implications for the neighborhood surrounding this development. And what are the communications plans around that? What are some of like the potential political liabilities involved in what the client wants to do? And then using the frontier model to think through, how do I make this a really unique pitch if I'm invited into a pitch that goes beyond just here's the bio of 6 lawyers on our team, here are all the deals they've done, here are all their litigation. Like, how do we orchestrate and harmonize all of that experience into a compelling story that we tell to the GC? So that's like one example. Another activity that we do is around role reshaping. So at the practice group level, breaking people into their practice groups and having the partners sit down, and I create for them 2 sets of assumptions. And the only rule is they're not allowed to argue with me about the assumptions. Like, that is not the point of the exercise. They could be wrong, but this is the thought exercise. Assume today that large language models can do these 10 things really well. Assume that 3 years from now, large language models will be able to do these 5 additional things really well. Now sit down as a group and write out all of the tasks that your junior associates do that is currently billable work, and compare it with these 2 sets of assumptions. Which things are immediately susceptible to impact? Which things will be impacted 3 years from now? And how do you reshape roles around whatever remains that is not part of those sets of assumptions? And how do you think about recruiting people who have the skills in those areas, which will be different than what you're recruiting for now? What are the opportunities and what are the challenges? So the activities themselves are like structured to a point, but I can't give you the answer for what a municipal real estate practice needs from this tool. But what I do see, Tom, and then I'll shut up. I'm sorry, I'm talking so long. What I do see is lawyers tend to gravitate and want to have the AI do the exact thing that they do that currently adds value for their client. And they're like disappointed when they say draft a lease provision that says X, or draft a tax comment letter that says Y, or draft me a set of interrogatories. They're inevitably disappointed because it's probabilistic technology and not deterministic. So like they come away and they say, this is so flawed, I would never use this in practice. To which I say, good. You don't want to be using that in practice yet. Like you want to continue to have value for what you're doing, but it has the capacity to help you solve all these bigger, hairier problems while it gets stronger and inevitably becomes more deterministic. So I think, again, it's all mindset shift around what you're actually able to use the technology for today and how you reimagine the way that you do your work from a business development, recruitment, retention, talent development standpoint tomorrow.
I think that recommendation of using it kind of like a teammate is a great one, because you're right. Like it gives you the space for it to grow with you, into a more deterministic, reliable tool. Yeah. Do you have like a couple of other pointers that you would have for lawyers watching this about how maybe they should think about what they're working with?
Yeah, I mean, I think lawyers, because we're such critical thinkers, like think back to that conversation about the clerkship. Like we are just designed to think critically about things, which is what gives us value. But I see so many lawyers spending their time, whatever amount of time they have to think about this, pointing out the flaws in the technology today. And I encourage them to really think about, okay, that's helpful for the purposes of this exercise. It's good to know that we still have value, but like we as a species are collectively not getting leaps and bounds smarter in the next 3 to 5 years, but this technology is going to get leaps and bounds smarter in the next 3 to 5 years. So I would encourage them to spend less time focused on the limitations of today's technology and more time thinking about like thought experiments, right? Like if you could shrink the preparation time for a deposition from 8 Ds to 8 hours, what does that mean for your business? There are all sorts of like fun activities you can do. With my business partner and I were talking this morning about like Mad Libs exercises for law firms where you leave blanks. It'll say like, imagine the technology can do blank in blank amount of time with blank documents sort of fed to it. And you at different practice groups have them think through different scenarios and what that would mean. So I think being like, to the point of the name of my company, being more creative in the way that we're thinking about deploying this technology and less like so myopic about both the way we deploy it and its limitations would really elevate your ability to respond to it. I also say like assume that every single competitor firm that surrounds you is thinking more creatively, more advanced than you are today, and is actively calling your clients and will persuade them to join them. As you're sort of sitting here talking about how it's overhyped and you're going to stick with the plan that you have, that seems to start people like the urgency builds around it, right? You're so insulated in a law firm from really thinking that deeply about like an unprecedented technology and how your competitors are using it. So again, like shifting that mindset to don't think about what's happening in this room, think about what's happening in the conference rooms of all of your peers and be afraid. Like you want to be ahead of this.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the adoption that Cleo pointed out from 19 to 79%, there's a lot of competition out there for figuring out how to use this to one's advantage. I also really like what you pointed out, that kind of thought experiment about assuming AI is this way now versus how it might be 5 years from now, and then performing this kind of common denominator analysis to see, what kind of human talent would make sense to get us from here to there. That's a great way to learn how to write it, as opposed to kind of like being caught off guard when it gets better.
Yeah, and like I think it's such a cool time in law because we've been so sort of running on parallel tracks and following a standard playbook for success in a law firm. And maybe I think it's cool because this is the work I get to do. If I were a law firm managing partner, I probably wouldn't think it was as cool. But there are so many sort of competitive advantages you've never had before. You can recruit from schools that are really teaching students how to leverage AI in a world that is sort of brand agnostic as to where the school is ranked in the 200 law schools, and you have the T14 dominating constantly. Well, now you have an opportunity as an employer to find schools outside the T14 that are really infusing new skills, and you get ahead by recruiting from those schools. I think that's such a win-win. You get advantages from having a strong culture. I've seen leadership really matter so much in this regard. I don't think that the person who has the Harvey license for every lawyer in their firm is necessarily going to win this race. I think it matters that leadership thinks it's an imperative and creates time and space for people to explore it together, even if that's on a publicly available frontier model with hypothetical scenarios, until you have access to the tech, because you will. So yeah, I think there's so many cool ways to do things better and more competitively that we've never had before. So I'm stunned when firms don't want to take that mindset.
Well, with the time we have left, there's a couple of questions I want to ask you that I ask all of my guests. The first one is just because we all tend to be a bit type A and have a lot going on, and you certainly do. How do you do it? Like, how do you keep it all balanced?
Oh, I definitely don't. That's the answer. I don't keep it all balanced. I don't get it all done. I do the best that I can, and I'm not like a superhero. I take a lot of naps on the weekends, and I have an amazing husband who supports me and takes a lot of the his share of child rearing and housekeeping and all those things. But yeah, I always have about 55 things on my task list at the end of every day that I didn't get to.
I hear you. Yeah, and having a great partner really helps.
Totally.
The other question is, after doing all of the stuff that we do, and dealing with the chaos of just life in general, like what makes it all worthwhile for you at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think about this question a lot, especially like since COVID. I think we all just had this wake up call of like, what are we here for? What does it mean? I think professionally for me, being able to be creative and being able to build is something that I have to have in my professional life. Like, I'm sure, there are worlds in which I could make a lot more money doing a different thing. But if I don't have creative freedom and the ability to build something new, and also have like great creative partners, I work with a phenomenal partner, and working with her, I get into that like state of flow that they always talk about. And it's like the day flies by. And it's sort of like a non-negotiable for me since COVID. I'm just very stubborn about that now.
Well, I mean, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you again for the Law Droid manifestos. I read them all the time. Thank you for everything you do to keep the profession literate. It's so important right now, and I'm really grateful.
Well, you have a lot of great lessons learned, and thank you for sharing them with my audience.
My pleasure.
And if they want to keep in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn, Jennifer Leonard, and I have a website, creativelawyers.net. So those are the best ways to find me.
And a great podcast.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have a great co-host. Otherwise, it would not be a great podcast. But I actually have two podcasts. So I have 2030 Vision AI and the Future of Law, which I get to co-host with Bridget McCormick. And then I have the exceptional opportunity to host for Practicing Law Institute, fast-tracked emergent issues in the legal profession, where I get to interview all sorts of interesting innovators and forward thinkers. So you can find those, either one of them, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube.
Well, you heard it here. Check out Jennifer's podcast, and all of her great work is really inspiring. So
thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, and thank all of you for watching. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the Law Droid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to Law Droid Manifesto, and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.